Good afternoon, sir. And we are the Group 10 and we are going to tackle about the Chapter 2, Moral Reasoning. By the way, my name is Claire Kalalang
And I'm Jmar Bikinlog.
and according to Thomas Jefferson, in Republican nation, whose citizens are to be led by reasons and persuasions and not by force, art of reasoning becomes of the first importance. So, scope of presentations. The three levels of thinking, moral analysis and praxis, overcoming resistance, the role of reason out statement in ethics, recognizing and constructing moral arguments, and avoiding informal fallacies, and last is resolving moral dilemmas. So first, the three levels of thinking is by sharpening our analytical skills, we can become more independent in our thinking and less susceptible to worldviews that foster narrow-mindedness. The thinking process used in philosophical inquiry can be broken down into three tiers of levels. So first is experience, second is interpretation, and the last is analysis. So, experience.
Experience is the first level of thinking. Experience goes beyond of the five senses. We notice certain events happening. We observe different feelings within ourselves. We have certain institutions and we receive information about the world by reading or hearing about the experience of others. Experience from the foundation of the philosophical enterprise. Without experience, there can be no thought. Kaning example sa experience kay kanang tong mga giagian sa una bitaw nga nakuan nato karon na nabalik karon muna siya. For example, sa una gipasakitan ka, then nabalik karon nga gipasakitan na po ka inana, like that's a part of experience.
So second is interpretation.
Interpretation involves trying to make sense of our experience. These levels of thinking includes individual interpretation of experience, where experience as well as collective or cultural interpretation. Some of our interpretation may be well informed, other may base merely on our opinion of personal experience.
So for example of this is in a study on stereotyping, college students were shown a picture of a white thug beating up a black man in a business suit. When students were later thug beating up a white businessman by not when students were later thug beating for example of this thug for example, in a study on stereotyping, college students were shown a picture of a white thug beating up a black man in business suit. When students were later asked to describe what they saw, the majority reported that they saw a black thug beating up a white businessman. By not analyzing our worldview, we can get caught up in a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy or vicious cycles where our worldview is verified by our experience and our experience in turn further confirms our distorted worldview. So next is analysis.
Analysis. People often blend fact and opinion. It is important, therefore, to learn to distinguish between the two by learning how to critically analysis of our worldview can break the various cycle we just described. Analysis of moral issues draws on the findings of the other disciplines such as psychology, sociology, and natures and sciences.
So analysis demands that we raise our level of experience. As such, level of consciousness and refuse to accept narrow interpretations of our experience. As such, analysis often begins with questions about the assumptions underlying our interpretations. So next is moral analysis and praxis. So moral analysis and praxis. Western philosophical methodology has traditionally focused primarily on the mode, analysis abstract, logical reasoning, and downplayed praxis. Although logical reasoning very important in moral philosophy, it represents only one aspect of what is meant by analysis in moral philosophy. So, the next is feminist methodology and praxis in ethical analysis. An article entitled Shifting Perspective, A New Approach of Ethics, Canadian philosopher Sheila Mallet outlines a process for ethical analysis based on what she calls a feminist methodology. Mallet's approach to ethical analysis involves three steps of dimension. So the first dimension is moral sensitivity, grows out of a collective consciousness raisings. The second dimension is
Ontological
shock.
shock. Ontology is the philosophical study of being or the nature of being. Ontological shock is something that shakes us to the very core of our being.
So next, the third dimension of analysis is praxis. Praxis refers to the practice of a particular art or skills in ethics. Praxis requires informed social actions. So next, liberation, ethics, and social actions.
Liberation's ethicist Paulo Freire, in his book The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, likewise writes, the shift of consciousness includes a search of collective action that can transform the existing unjust social structures.
So,
Suray.
next
Example.
is, wala na dyan may example, ano sir. We're so sorry kaya wala dyan may kasabot. Overcoming resistance. Most of us hate to be proved wrong. When a particular paradigm becomes thoroughly entrenched in our worldview, we may begin to see it as back rather than an interpretation of experience, especially if we benefit by that particular worldview. So kita man jud kay di man kita ganahan nga pasangin lang na kita nga i-prove gid sa tuwa nga sayop gid ka.
Yes.
Kay naraba jud uban nga bisag dili imo ang agi i-prove gyud kanila nga kuan ikaw gid mo sayop. So
Sa wala sila i-prove.
mo nang hinawaing puta kay pasangin lang magud
Ma-offended
puta.
ta.
Next is to avoid having our worldview challenged, we may use a type of defense mechanism known as resistance. Defense mechanisms are psychological tools which we usually learn at an early age. For coping with difficult situations, defense mechanism can be divided into two main types. First is coping and second is resistance. So coping.
Coping or healthy defense mechanism allow us to work through challenges to our worldview and to adjust our life in a ways that maintain our integrity.
Resistance, in contrast, involves the use of immature defense mechanisms that are rigid, impulsive, maladaptive, and non-analytical. Isolation, rationalizations, indecisions, and denial are all examples of immature defense mechanisms. Everyone uses defense mechanism at times to keep from feeling overwhelmed. Children from abusive backgrounds often find it necessary to construct rigid defenses to avoid being crushed by their circumstances. The problem arises though when people carry this once appropriate defense mechanism into their adult life rather than substituting more mature forms of defense. When resistance becomes a habitual way of responding to issues, it acts as a barrier to critical analysis and interpretations of worldviews. So next is, there are 8 types of resistance. So first is ignorance.
Not learning about a particular issues because we don't want to know.
So ang example ani is di kita ganahan nga kuan kana ingnon tag ignorante kay.
Yes.
Ikaw pag ko ng example.
Kay once nga ingnon kag ignorante, ma-offend jud ka kay sa imo ang kaugalingon, then kailangan pananglitan nga kuan karon pa ka nakakita ana nga butang kay wala sa inyo ang kuan sa inyong place o sa inyo ang kuan culture, then giingnan kag ignorante, then syempre ma-offend ka, then lisod pod og kuan kanang wala sa inyo an lisod pugpugso na to nga kuan ingnon na dayon tag ignorante ta, then kanang
Next is avoidance. Staying away from people and situations that challenges our worldview. So, kinahanglan gid pod nga napud tay mo-avoid pud ta sa mga tawo nga kuan kanang makasakit sa atoa or maka-offend sa atoa. Dapat mo avoid pud ta. Napud tay limitations to avoid them. Next is denial. Refusing to acknowledge problems and issues. Anger. Using threats or violence to keep others from challenging our views. So, dapat ang masuko ta di kita magpataka og kasuko nga wala lang po hinungdan nga kay makakuan man po na siya og threats o kanang violence nga maka-offend po sa ubang tao. Next is clutches. Responding with right sayings or expressions when our views are challenged. Next is conformity, so superficial tolerance.
agreeing simply for the sake of agreeing.
I'm struggling. Wrestling with an issue as a substitute of taking a stand. So, for example, kami nga, kuan, kanang gidaghan kayong activity nga gipanghatag. For example lang pod, kanang gitagaan mig activity nga daghan sa among kuan instructor din. So, syempre, mag-struggle pod mi kay kuan man kanang napod mi time para sa amoa, then maglisod pod mi handle sa among kuan, sa amo ang mga activity. So, maka-feel pod mi struggle. So, next is distractions. Turning to diversions to keep from thinking about troubling issues. So, example. Distractions. Nang ma-distract.
Oo.
Di kita ganahan nga kuan og natay gamon nga i-distract kita kay mawala man ita sa tong mga gipangbuhat. And the rest of our report will be tackled about by Julie and Jerome. So that would be the part of our report, sir. And thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Jerome Gutines.
My name is Jollity Silviniata.
So for today, we're going to report the role of is and oath statements in ethics. So, what is the role of is and oath statements in ethics? Well, certainly, these two types of is statements and oath statements. Is statements are descriptive statements that describe the way things are or the facts about a particular situation or action. These statements focus on providing objective information about the world and can describe what people actually do or believe. For example, an is statements might be people tend to act in their own self-interest. On the other hand, oath statements are normative statements that express moral or ethical judgments about what should or ought to be done. These statements focus on providing subjective opinions about what individuals or societies should do or believe. For example, an oath statements might be individuals should always act in the best interest of others. It's important to note that the relation between is and oath statements is a subject of ongoing debate in ethics, and different ethical theories may approach this relationship in different ways. So there are two types of is and ought statements. The two types of is and ought statements is descriptive statements and prescriptive statements. The descriptive statements is to tell us what is descriptive statements are either true or false. False. Here are examples of descriptive statements. This morning, I saw Gloria out of a John room. At the 7:17 p.m. last night, my roommate said to me, I promised to clean the bathroom before I go to bed. Prescriptive statements, on the other hand, deal with values. They tell us what ought to be. Here are some examples of prescriptive statements. We ought to tell the truth to Detective Friday about what happened on campus this morning. People ought to keep their promises. Recognizing and constructing moral arguments. So, what is recognizing and constructing moral arguments? Well, recognizing moral arguments involves identifying and understand the ethical or moral principles and values that are being discussed or debated in a particular situation. These arguments often involve questions of right or wrong, good or bad, and the principles that guide human behavior. So, logic, the ability to analyze arguments and to recognize faulty reasoning is important to the study of ethics. Logic is the study of correct and incorrect reasoning. The meaning of logic, it refers to the ability to analyze arguments and recognize faulty reasoning. In the context of the study of ethics, logic is the discipline that focuses on understanding correct and incorrect reasoning. Reason is defined as the power of understanding the connection between the general and the particular. The meaning of the reason is defined as the power of understanding the connection between general principles or concepts and specific instances or particulars. It involves the ability to think logically and make rational judgment. So that is the meaning of logic and reason. The components of an argument. To distinguish between correct and incorrect reasoning, we need to be able to recognize arguments. An argument is made up of two or more propositions. One of these claimed to follow from or be supported by others. A proposition is a statement that expresses a complete thought. It can be either of true or false. True or false. The conclusion is the proposition that is affirmed or denied on the basis of the other proposition in the arguments. The premise is the proposition that supports or gives reason for accepting the conclusion. Let's go to the 5 steps for construction moral arguments. So what is the 5 steps for constructing moral arguments? Number 1, develop a list of premises. Number 2, eliminate irrelevant or weak premises. Number 3, come to a conclusion. Number 4, try out your arguments on the others. Number 5, reverse your argument if necessary. So, what is the meaning of develop a list of premises? The develop a list of premises begins by identifying the key principles or premises that will form the foundation of your argument. These premises should be statements or beliefs that support your moral position. Number 2, eliminate irrelevant or weak premises. The element relevant or weak premises is review your list of premises and remove any that are relevant to your argument or are weak in their support. It's important to ensure that all the premises you include are relevant and strong. Number 3, come to a conclusion. Come to a conclusion based on the remaining premises. Draw a logical conclusion that aligns with your moral position. This conclusion should be a logical result of the premises and should support your overall argument. Number 4, try out your arguments on the others. Try out your arguments on the others. Present your arguments to others and engage in discussion or debates to test its strength and validity by hearing different perspectives and receiving feedback. You can refine and strengthen your arguments. Number 5, reverse your argument if necessary. Reverse your arguments if necessary. Based on the feedback and insights gained from interacting with others, reverse your arguments if needed. This may involve adjusting or replacing premises, refining the conclusion, or strengthening the supporting evidence. So let's talk about avoiding informal fallacies. Arguments like men and are often pretenders of the two. Informal fallacies are psychologically persuasive but incorrect arguments. There are 13 informal fallacies. So what are those? Equivocation, a key term shifts meaning during course of an argument. It means the equivocation. This fallacy occurs when a key term in an argument is used with different meanings, leading to a misleading or false conclusion. Appeal to force, threat of force, or intimidation is used to coerce our opponents into accepting our conclusions. It means appeal to force. In this fallacy, force, threat of force, or intimidation is used to pressure opponents into accepting a particular conclusion. Abusive, we attack our opponent's character rather than address his or her conclusion. In means abusive, this fallacy involves attacking the character of opponents instead of addressing their conclusion or argument. Circumstantial, we argue that our opponents should accept a particular position because of his or her lifestyle or membership in a particular group. It means circumstantial. This fallacy occurs when an argument suggests that an opponent should accept a certain position based on their lifestyle or membership in particular group. Appeal to inappropriate authority. This testimony of someone who is an authority in a different field is used as support for our conclusion. It means this fallacy happens when the testimony or opinion of someone who is an authority in a different field is used as support for conclusion. Popular appeal. The option of the majority is used as support for our conclusion. It means popular appeal. This fallacy relies on the option of majority to support our conclusion. Hasty generalization. Our conclusion is based on atypical cases. It means that this fallacy involves drawing a conclusion based on atypical or insufficient evidence. Accident. We apply a generally accepted rule to an atypical case where the rule is inappropriate. It means in this fallacy, a general rule is applied to an atypical case where the rule is not appropriate. Ignorance. We argue that a certain position is true because it hasn't been proven false or that it is false proven true. It means this fallacy occurs when a position is agreed to be true or false based on the lack of evidence to prove otherwise. Begging the question. The premise and conclusion are different wordings of the same position. It means this fallacy happens when the premise and conclusion of an agreement are essentially restatements of the same position without providing any new evidence or reasoning. Irrelevant conclusion. Our argument is directed at a conclusion different from the one on under discussion. It means This fallacy occurs when an argument is directed towards a conclusion that is different from the one being discussed or debated. Naturalistic. Naturalistic, we argue from what is natural to what ought to be the case. It means this fallacy involves arguing from what is considered natural to what ought to be the case without providing sufficient justification. Appeal to tradition. We argue that something is moral because it is traditional. It means in this fallacy, an argument claims that something is moral or correct because it is traditional or has been done for a long time. So that is my report. And
Resolving moral dilemmas. According to Bernard Williams' Problems of Self, 1973, moral conflicts are neither systematically avoidable nor all solvable without reminder. What is moral dilemma? A moral dilemma refers to a situation where a person is faced with making a decision between various choices, all of which have conflicting moral implications. It involves a conflict between two or more moral principles, values, or duties, making it challenging to determine the right course of action. Here are a few examples of moral dilemmas. The one, the trolley problem. A runway trolley is headed toward 5 people tied to the tracks. You have the option to divert the trolley onto a different track where there is only one person tied. The moral dilemma arises when you have to decide whether to take action, divert the trolley, and directly cause the death of the person, of the take no action and indirectly cause the death of 5 people. There are 5 resolving a moral dilemma examples. Describe the facts. The first step is resolving the moral dilemma is to arrive at a clear description of the case. Avoid the use of emotional or biased language in describing the dilemma. This is descriptions of the facts which can be as short as a photograph or 2 is similar to the premises in an algorithm that contain empirical statements. Where putting together these descriptions, facts may come to light that we did not initially realize were relevant. Here are some examples of describing facts. The 1. The earth revolves around the sun. 2. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. 3. The moon is approximately 384,400 kilometers away from the earth. 4. The Statue of Liberty was gifted to the United States by France in 1986. 5. The human body consists of approximately 206 bones. Possible course of actions. Once the first 2 steps are complete, begin listening possible alternative courses of action. This is a time of brainstorms. List any possible actions that come to mind. Some ideas that seem silly at first might work well in combination with others. Devise a plan of action. Because none of the solutions will be completely satisfactory, the proposed course of actions needs to be examined to determine which actions or combinations of action takes into account the greatest number of important moral concerns. Highlight the courses of actions that seem the best and delete the others. Your final plan of action can include combination of some of the alternative courses of action, just in case your first plan doesn't work. Carry out the plan of action. Finally, as with any type of moral reasoning, you must be motivated to put the chosen plan of action into effect. Even the best throughout plan is useless if it is not carried out. Moral reasoning that is unrelated to actions or praxis becomes a mere academic exercises. Then, a final word. According to William James, 1842-1910, between us and the universe there are no rules of the game. The important thing is that our judgments should be right, not they should observe a logical etiquette. Logical or moral reasoning is a tool rather than an end itself. Moral reasoning is only one of the components of moral development. Moral sentiments like sympathy and intuitive truths are also important for ethical decisions making indeed. Just as a person who is deficient in moral reasoning can make decisions that he or she later come to regret, so too can people who are rational but lack sympathy inadvertently have incurred and unfeeling ways.